There is something about being alone in the midst of a field of river cane, about standing near the course of a stream, wandering in a forest of swaying trees, walking a deserted beach battered by wind, or climbing a mountain top blinded by the stark quiet of its persistent snow. There is something about listening to sounds of nature, something which appears particular. The experience of alternating sounds and silence can be overwhelming. The sudden burst of animal sounds, insects, wind, rain, water, thunderstorm, lightning, and the similarly unexpected moment of quiet, a silence so intense that it seems to have a tactile property, so deep that it seems to have the four-dimensionality of time and space, intertwined, suspended. At times such silences can be unbearable. Natural sounds may be distant from our everyday urban lives. For many of us, they have become almost alien. Their singularity can provoke fear or disquiet, the feeling of places haunted by strange presence. A place in between places, a temporal non-space, intermezzo, a strange realm whose nature is not easily understood. With this account of a personal experience, I introduce Onibaba, 1964, a film by Japanese directors Kiyomi Kuroda. In my brief excursus into post-war Japanese film, Kuroda will be the main starting point and concern. At the same time, we will also ricochet back and forth between Yasujiro Ozu's Late Spring, 1949, and Akira Kurosawa Dersu Uzala, 1975. The choice of these three directors and their films follows the denouement of a specific aesthetic of Japanese film relating to the concept of ma, a word that stands for pause, gap, or emptiness in the Japanese philosophical tradition. Man collapses dichotomies of space-time relations, transcending the definition of space-time intervals. Contemporary architect Isozaki Arata argues that the Cartesian duality of space-time is rooted in a homogeneous and infinite continuum, and this forms the basis of modern philosophical thought in the West but not in Japan. Space and time are conceived as omnipresent and analogous. Instead of being separate from each other, space and time relate. Thus, space is perceived as identical with the events or phenomena occurring in it. Although it may be considered as in-betweenness, ma stands on the edge of a particular mode of experience that empties the objective-subjective world. Stepping closer to the logic of Japanese film in respect to ma, I quote Kamei Fumio, one of the earlier 20th century Japanese film documentaries, who writes, "The form of mainstream film is constructed so that the viewer can only start thinking about the film after it is finished. During a film, however, the viewers are not allowed to develop any creative ideas on their own. If with shot A an idea arises, then the director explains that idea with a shot B. This type of art is contrary to that of haiku, and I think documentary film must be like haiku. If the viewer observes something with shot A, then shot B must produce the space for the viewers to freely develop their own creative possibilities. Shot B therefore demands a new observation by the viewer, as opposed to the ones that are usually supplied for them. Shot B is what I call the Ma of documentary film.
In
the work of Kuroda, Ozu, and Kurosawa, I investigate the absence, presence, and in-betweenness of sounds and music in selected movies of the post-war Japanese film industry. In stark contrast to Western films of the same historical period, Japanese film presents a distinct aesthetic that is sparse and parsimonious in its use of sound and music. Due to the brevity of this presentation, I will not delve into a full comparative analysis of Japanese and Western cinema and their different strategies in the use of sound. I limit myself to a few examples, breadcrumbs for the reader to follow if so inclined. Kuroda's Onibaba, Demon Hag, is set in a rural area during a civil war in the 15th century. The protagonists are two women who live together and, in order to survive, kill soldiers and steal their possessions. Having escaped the war, a man returning to this hut near a river soon comes between the two women. By having an affair with the younger woman, the man sparks jealousy and resentment in the older one, who is concerned about being abandoned and unable to carry on alone. Throughout the film, we only see the area of the river, surrounded by the never-ending field of giant river cane. The two huts of the protagonists are both located next to the stream of the water.
お前さんは部下を行産しなせたんじゃろうの。むごいことじゃの。死んだもんは死に損じゃの。
The film modulates its temporality through the use of what can be called thematic cells of sound. Onibaba opens with a field of river cane jostled by strong wind. We do not hear the sound of wind, but rather a jazzy tune driven by percussive rhythm, punctuated by thick blasts from brass instruments. Just after the film's opening, the soundtracks fall silent as the camera gives a bird's-eye view of the field. Approaching from above, it reveals the track of two samurai fleeing enemies. Two spears fly from the cane, hitting them, and they die. The two women, who have killed them, after removing their armor and belongings, throw the warrior's body into a nearby hole, a pit hidden among the river cane. The moment the dead bodies fall into the pit, the opening music recurs. We understand at this point, after 10 minutes, that the opening music has anticipated this later moment, the death of the samurai. Between the first iteration of the musical theme and the second, the sounds we heard are heavy breathing of the protagonist, the sogging of the cane, crumpled corpses being hauled to the pit. Placing music and sounds against the visual of the film is organic to the plot development. Evening scenes of the river cane combine crackling sounds with string instruments that play spare low notes and glissandi. Night in the field seems to evoke such sounds. Half an hour into the film, left alone at night, the older woman deceives a lost samurai who wears a Hanya mask. He asks the way out of the field, and she conducts him directly over the pit, into which he falls and dies. With the aid of a long rope, the woman then descends into the pit to steal the fallen samurai's belongings. Once she reaches the bottom, we recognize the same snap, crackling sound heard many times during the previous 30 minutes of the film. These are the bones of samurai peeled at the bottom of the pit, which, as she steps on them, break and snap under her weight. This event was anticipated by sounds occurring much earlier in the film. Here, I observe a leitmotif-like associations between thematic cells of sounds and recurrent situations in the film. By associations, I mean a direct relationship with the visual content of the events in the film, both synchronous and asynchronous. The jazz tune is associated with death. The snap crackling sound is associated with a pit filled with human bones. The sound of beating that appears in two specific episodes, beating clothes with a club at the river, and the hammer beating the Hanya mask on the old woman's face. Both these events are associated with denouement and unfolding. The sounds of doves and wind is associated with the young woman running in the field, desire and freedom. The galloping of horses is associated with fighting and robbery. Often these connections are asynchronous in respect to the temporality of images in the film. These associations do not comment on what we see, but anticipate, hint, and or displace filmic events past or yet to come. From a compositional perspective, it seems the layering of visuals and sounds is constantly shift apart to create gaps and moments of stillness. The killing of the samurai, repeated scene in which the protagonists eat around the fire in the hut, daily routines of getting water from the river, beating the clothes, preparing to sleep. For extended portion of the film, all these are silent, aside from the sounds of the actions themselves: chewing meat, swallowing drink, heavy breathing, water flowing, steps, the dragging of the bodies. There is a recurrent and persistent emptiness in striking contrast to fullness with its moment of sparse sounds and music. I use the words of Kamei to interpret the gaps and long silences. This is the place of the Ma of Japanese film, where the plot is not developed but take a pause for the viewer to think, to consider alternative possibility in the story, to contemplate a prolonged instant of time within the gap of the film. A gap where sound is not heard or is murmured, where music is not played but lingers within, or has been proposed earlier in similar scenes. Now I jump cut, using a favored Godardian strategy, to Ozu's Late Spring. There is a pause for contemplation, a pause in the temporality of the film in the so-called empty shots of Ozu's films. At the very end of Late Spring, we witness a still shot of an empty room in the evening with a few objects in the frame. We have seen this room and its objects many times during the film. It has been the place of conversations among the protagonists, of ordinary actions and situations and emotional moments. In the empty shot at the end of the film, the room reappears emptied of the presence of people, emptied of the actions, emptied of the sounds that accompany all the events. But still a sound endures within the space, a sound that is not heard but is there, in absentia, sound that is imbued in the fabric of the object of the room and the incorporeal presence of the people who lived in that space. With the second jump cut, I reach the open spaces of the Russian Far East, the Sikote Alin area of Kurosawa film Dersu Uzala. Here the relationship between human beings and nature is questioned. Living in nature or living in boxes, to quote Dersu's words, protagonist of the film. Dersu is a hunter, used to living in the woods, who encounters an expedition of soldiers sent to map the territory. Dersu can hear things in the forest that the soldiers cannot hear. Dersu can see things the soldiers cannot see. Dersu can smell and understand by touch things that the soldiers are unaware of. What Dersu hears is beyond the camera, beyond our understanding as spectators, beyond the soldiers. Here the sounds of the forest belong to a space and time of which we are almost unaware. Again Ma returns, a liminal space, an in-between dimension of living and understanding. Dersu is still living in a magical reconnaissance with nature. He lives with it, understanding his territory as a living being. The still silence of the tundra is disrupted by a blizzard that almost kills the captain of the soldiers. Sound and silence, the bosom of nature, is intense, and at times has extreme consequences.
Yeah. 悪かった。許してくれ。わしはお前の邪魔をするために鬼の面をかぶってほとか言った。
Here, with a final leap, I return from the Russian Far East back to the Japanese river cane field of Onibaba, with its intense silences and sounds. In Onibaba, synchronicities of action and music happens only during the night escapades of the young woman, who runs to the man's hut. Here the sounds of doves and wind punctuates the sense of achieved freedom, tinted with excitement and fear, eros and thanatos. The field at night is indeed a dangerous place. The lost samurai is in the Hanya mask whom the old woman deceived. The Hanya is a female demon mask of jealousy and vengeance, used traditionally in Japanese No theater. The mask changes expression through use of perspective and light. Straight ahead, mask appear frightening and angry. When tilted down, the face of the demons appears sorrowful and tormented, as if in tears. The old woman manages to pull off the mask from the dead samurai to discover that his face is disfigured, as if the mask was attached to his skin. Nonetheless, later in the film, the old woman wears the mask in the field at night as a demon would, chasing the younger woman in hopes of scaring and dissuading her from meeting the man. After being worn a few times, one night the mask sticks to her face. In the last scene of the film, the old woman, desperate, reveals her trick to the younger woman. Pleading for forgiveness, she asks for help to remove the diabolical mask. With a hammer, the young woman manages to remove the mask. The old woman's face is disfigured. The girl runs away, believing she is a demon. The old woman runs behind her, desperate, screaming that she is still human. They inadvertently cross the pit, and the old woman falls in. The music of the opening return, the film ends. And so ends my excursus into characteristics of sounds and music in selected Japanese film of the post-war era. I'm aware that because of the limited time at disposal, this presentation is more an introduction to this topic, constellated with possible direction of investigation and further readings of the nature of relationship of moving images and sounds in Japanese film. Nevertheless, it is of interest to notice that the concept of Ma often recurs in the artistic or conceptual outcomes of Japanese aesthetic from film to dance, theater, visual art, architecture, and music. I conclude my presentation in the hope that this inquiry may spark further discussion and interest in the topic of Japanese film and the philosophical concept of Ma.